Hello everyone and welcome to round 3 of FIDE Women's Chess Olympiad 2024. Here India was playing against Switzerland, who recently became much stronger in women's chess after the transfer of Alexander Kostyuk from Russia to Switzerland. So the first game is between Drunavali Harika versus Alexander Kostyuk. Kostyuk plays e4. Harika plays the solid e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop c4, the Italian opening. Harika plays bishop c5, the standard stuff, c3, knight f6. The another idea of bishop c5 is to avoid the fried liver attack, which comes after knight f6, knight g5, d5. So black plays bishop c5, c3, knight f6, d3, d6, knight bd2, castle, h3. So here white waited for black to castle before playing h3, because if white had gone castle something like h6 and h3, then black can go some for g5 and start attacking on the king side. So white waits for black to castle, then goes h3, a5, and now white castles. Black now goes h6 because white has castle, so g5 is not a g4 is not a big threat. White goes rook e1, bishop e6. This is all standard theory. White goes bishop d5. Black goes queen b8. So this line become very popular in 2022, and I've seen a lot of people playing this. Even I played this sometimes in 2022, but this is a very theoretical line, which I don't really like much. So, but here Harika plays, which is very fine because she really needs a draw on the first board to get a really good position for the team. White goes knight f1, queen a7, creating a battery on this diagonal, hitting f2, and also activating the queen this way. White goes rook e2, a4, rook c2. This is not really theory, but I think this was preparation, because Kostyuk still has 1 hour 31 minutes. Black goes queen f5, takes, and bishop d2. White mainly goes for d4 here, but she prepares d4 by going bishop d2 and threatening d4 here. Black moves, white goes c4, so which is really not the best idea, because this kind of creates a solid weakness on d4. Black goes queen c8, bishop e3, takes, and c5. So black is saying that I have a very good solid structure, a good bishop. I cannot really be worse here. Knight g3, knight h7, creating some kind of queen d8, knight g5 ideas. King h2, queen d8, rook f2, and g6. So black will just go king g7, and with this bishop on e6, black really doesn't need to worry about any kind of threats on f1, f5. White goes knight e2, c6, knight e3, queen f5, rook c1, and rook s7. So rook s7 is always a very good idea, because if black ever goes f5, then it can directly swing to the king side, and also it can also go rook b7, rook b8, and double up on the b file. White goes king h1, just a preventive move. Rook b8, d4. Here Harika misplays and goes with the wrong pawn, creating any kind of e5 break followed by knight e4. So the best I think would have been cd4, ed4, and just taking on c4, because if white takes back, takes, and queen d6, black can just go rook d8, queen e5, knight e5, and bishop b5. I think this is very equal for black. Black can really never be worse, because he has a strong bishop and this e4 pawn is very weak. But black doesn't really go for this, and he starts going wrong here with ed4, cd4, and she Goes for bishop c4, but here the problem is the pawn is not on e5, so there is always some kind of e5 and knight e4 ideas. Black takes here, rook d2, hitting this. Black goes knight g5, knight d4. Black is a pawn up, but still white has a lot of compensation. Queen b6, and white takes back the pawn. Here, Harika just blunders. The only way black can survive here is with rook a4, queen a4, knight e4. Here, if white goes knight c6, then she had to find this brilliant rook e8. So after queen c4, black can take here, and if white moves something like rook c2, black can go d5, supporting this bishop and then threatening knight g3. This was a very difficult line to find during the game, which is really understandable. Also with so less time, like 5 minutes on the clock. Harika blunders here with queen a6. White goes b3, and now suddenly this bishop can't move, because if this bishop moves to something like e6, white has knight c6, forking this to rooks. And if black goes bishop b5, then this knight will jump back and threatening a4 here. The problem is black can't play c5 because white has two knights attacking this bishop instead of against this one rook. So Harika plays c5, white takes c4, rook c4, c into d4, rook into d4, and now white is just a pawn up with super solid knight on a4, two connected pass pawns on the queen side, and a very weak d6 for black. Black goes queen d7, so rook d6 can mate with knight e4. White goes knight c3 back. Rook c8, a4 starts pushing the pawns. Rook a8, knight d5. So white is just playing very good here, threatening some kind of knight f6, queen a1. Black goes rook c5, knight f6, king g7, knight g4. So now queen a1 is the real threat. Black goes h5, kicking this knight. White takes, and rook d7. She just clears this diagonal for the queen, and after queen c6, she finally goes queen a1. With this knight on g4, the queen on a1 with this clean diagonal, and rook on d7 preventing f6. Black is just dead lost. King h7, knight f6, king h6, h4. She just ends the game almost perfectly. Knight e4 and rook f7, threatening mate. Knight f6, queen c1, g5 is forced, g5 and queen g5 mate. So Harika resigns on queen c1, and we are at a deficit of 1 point. But the good news is the strongest player of the Switzerland team is already gone. So the last three balls we are clear favorites. So we move on to the board 2 of Indian team. Here Vaishali is playing against Ghazal Hakimifard from Switzerland, and we are currently at a deficit of 1-0. So it's very crucial to win this game. White goes d4, knight f6, bishop f4, the London system. d5, e3, e6, knight f3, bishop d6, knight e5, castles, knight e2. So if you guys remember, this is the exact line Arjun played yesterday against his much lower opponent. There black had gone for b6, bishop a6, but here black goes c5, c3 and c4. This is a very new kind of concept that came into existence after the computers become strong. So this idea is that I won't allow the bishop to go to d3, from where it will do all kind of attacking threats. And I know this is kind of closing the center. White can get some breaks with e5, but black is saying that I'll get this b5, b4 break faster than you. White goes h4, queen c7, h5, knight d7, and h6. White just pushes till h6, creating the weakness on g7. And white goes knight df3. So here, according to the engine, it is already a slightly better for black, but I don't really agree with it, because for black to get better here, he has to play perfectly as the engine would play, but black is never going to play perfectly here. Black goes for knight e4, threatening some f6 ideas. Queen c2, b5, bishop e2, a4, knight d7, takes, takes. Here black takes with the queen, which allows white to go knight d2 and exchange this knight. If black had gone knight d6, then I think black is already a much better, because black is going to go b5, rook b8, and just open up the queen side, while white is nowhere near starting the attack. But of course, black don't really play perfectly. Black goes queen d6, knight d2, takes, takes, and d5, which is just a rubbish move. Black had to go b4 here and create some play on the queen side, but instead she just opens up the king side, where white is already advanced till h6, and opens up this diagonal also, from where white can just jump in. D into e5, queen into e5, f4, queen f6. Here white goes king f2, which is very understandable. Rook d8, rook d1, queen, bishop f5. I think white can just simply go queen d4 here and just go into the endgame. With this weak pawn on d5, white is just simply winning here. Takes, takes, rook d7. Black is super passive. White will just push all the pieces here, target d5 pawn, and then somehow just grab it. Rook d8. Rook d2 is not really sure, but I can understand that she didn't want to go bishop f3 because of bishop d3. So she goes rook d2, a4, bishop f3. Black could still go here, but here again white has some kind of e4 ideas. Takes, rook d7, bishop e4, and then she will take back here and king e3 and just take the d3 pawn. So black goes bishop e6, which is very passive, and white simply goes e4. She exchanges everything here, and this is just a clearly winning bishop endgame, because all the pawns are on the white square and all of white's pawns are on the dark squares. These two are on the light square, but white can just play a3 and g3 and put everything on the dark square. The king is coming to c5, and it's just clearly winning. Black goes king f8, king e3, king e7, king d4, king d6, and bishop d5. Black manages to get the king to d6, but this pawn on h6 is very dangerous, and white will create some kind of a zugzwang and enter with king c5. She immediately goes back with king e7. I think bishop e8 would have been much better, making white work a bit harder. But king e7 is just allowing king c5, bishop c6, and just resigns. She plays a couple more moves. King f6, white goes king d6, bishop c8, king c6, king f5, and white just picks up this pawn so that black can't really create a pass pawn on the king side. Takes, and bishop g6 wins. This h pawn that was pushed up the board in the first 10 moves finally decides the game for white. And with this, India is back in the lead again. Not in the lead, India equalizes again with 1-1. So now the score is equal 1-1. We move on to the third board, where Divya is playing Sofia Rizlova. Divya is clear favorite with 300 points more than the opponent. White goes for d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, e3, c5, the Nimzo Indian, knight f3, d5, a3. This is all common theory. White goes for the bishop pair, but Divya doesn't give it up this time. She goes for bishop f5, takes, receive 4, stopping any kind of b4 ideas. Queen d8, bishop d8. I think white is really happy to go into an endgame, because she's really 300 points below. So knight d4, knight d7, c6, bc6, knight 6. I'm a bit surprised by Divya's decision to go into this because exchanging the queens so early might sometimes backfire because you won't get much to continue the game. She goes bishop b7, knight d8, rook d8, bishop c4. She has actually gone wrong here and is already minus. So if black goes bishop g2, which she goes rook g1, bishop f3. White really can't take here because of knight e5. Hitting this, opening up this rook's diagonal, rook's file, and some kind of mate threats on d1. White goes rook g5, stopping knight e5. Black goes knight h4, again threatening knight e5, h3. This knight comes to knight e5, bishop b5, and castles. So black has managed to get the pawn back and has superb compensation. e4 is just a bad move because this pawn will definitely become weak, and with f6 and knight c5, this is just over. Stabilizing the knight, rook g3 and knight c5, threatening knight e4 and rook d1. White goes bishop e3, black goes knight b3, rook b1 and knight d4, taking away the only bishop which could have destabilized this e5 knight, and bishop a4, h5. Here white again misplaced with h4. I think white should definitely have taken this knight and gone bishop d1, trying to exchange these strong pieces and try to go for a draw here. But with h4, this g4 square also becomes weak, and also black has an idea of going g5 here, creating this very strong h passer which will just decide the game there, with this bishop controlling the queen square. But Divya goes f5, which is also winning. Bishop h6, bishop g4, just covering the pin. Bishop g5, knight f3, forking this. King f1, knight g5 takes, and f4. So with this, the rook is forced to go back to g1. Bishop h, knight f3 first. I think bishop h3 was also winning because king e2, f3, king e3. There's rook d3 mate, and if white goes king e1, then knight d3, king f2, knight king d2, and knight f2, just winning. But Divya goes knight f3 first, which is also winning because she just takes the exchange and threatens this fork, picking up by exchange for sure. White goes bishop b5, black goes bishop h3, king e2, knight d4. She really doesn't need to take this bishop because she's just going for a mate here. King e1, which is just mate in one move because knight c2, bishop covers f1, rook covers d1, d2, and the first move is king e2, and here the brilliant, beautiful mate in one, f3. This just shows that even the material is equal. The coordination of pieces is so important. This is covering this, knight covers the e1, e3 square, rook covers this d3, d2, and d1 square, and white's own pawn covers the f2 square. And it's mate. With this, while black has got India has got the 2-1 lead against Switzerland. So we move on to the final game. That is Vantika versus Maria Manko. India is already leading with 2-1, so even a draw in this game would be enough. But of course, Vantika wins the game. She goes for d4, d5, c4, the queen's gambit, e6, knight f3, knight f6, g3, the Catalan, a very solid choice, dc4, bishop g2, and c5. So this is a very common opening where black goes for the center immediately after taking on c4. White goes castle, knight c6, and knight e5. This is still a very common theory. Black goes knight bishop d7, knight c4, cd4, bishop f4. So this line is very very old. I think this was played in the World Championship match between Anand and Kramnik, if I'm not wrong. And here black goes knight d5. White plays knight d6, takes. The dynamic in this position is black has a pawn, but white has this bishop pair and this super strong bishop which controls the black's castling. Black goes knight d7, trying to castle next move. Knight d2, castles, and queen b3. I think the better was to go for knight f3 and just take the pawn with double bishop. I think this would also have given white a very pleasant edge. But Vantika goes queen b3, b6, rook c1. The threat is bishop c6. If black goes for something like h6, bishop c6, bishop c6, bishop e7, queen e7, rook c6, just taking a piece. Black goes rook c8, protecting it. The bishop comes back. Rook e8, getting unpinned. Now here white goes knight e4, getting another piece on d6, which will just be devastating for black. Black goes knight f5, white goes g4, knight h4, knight d6. So white just gets the exchange here, even though white has to give up this Catalan bishop, but exchange is an exchange. Knight g2, king g2. Here black again misses and goes knight a5. I think black should definitely have gone for something like rook b8, keeping one pair of rooks. But after knight a5, queen f3, this f7 pawn is now very weak. And after bishop c6, Vantika gets to play this brilliant move, rook c6, knight c6. Here actually white would have cleanly won the game immediately here with knight c8, queen c8 and rook c1, pinning this knight and just taking the piece. But white plays queen f7, which is very human move, but not really the best. King h8. She just takes here, takes, and she just goes into a endgame where the pawns are equal, but this bishop is much stronger than this knight, and the rook is directly going into the 7th rank. Knight e5, king g3, king g8, and rook c7. Very natural move. a5, king f4, knight f7, king e4. The king is now centralized, hitting d4, e5, h4, stopping any kind of knight g5 checks. This bishop is stopping knight d6 check. Knight goes g8. This stops knight g6, rerouting the knight to f4. Knight comes back, threatening knight g5 again. Now it's a very, very nice move that Vantika plays. Bishop e7. Dominating this knight, stopping knight d6 and knight g5 both with this super strong bishop on e7. Also, this blocks this rook's file. So now the knight is tied up on the defense of the e5 pawn. Black goes h6, f3, king h7, king d5. And white says, I'll just go and pick up all the pawns with my king. You can't do anything. King g8, a4, rook b8, king e6, rook c8, rook b7, and she starts picking up the pawns. Rook e8, king d7, getting out of the pin. Rook a8. She just repeats one time because she is just super low on the clock, and with just 2 moves she will reach 40 moves and get 30 minutes in the clock. Rook e8, and she just takes the b6 pawn. Rook c8, rook a6. The problem with black is black can't even go rook c2 because rook a8, king h7 and king f7. White is just getting the pawn, getting the whole piece. So black just goes knight g5, a desperate attempt, but it's already over. Takes, and king e5. White is just going to pick up all these pawns and just win the game. Rook e8, king d4, rook e2, rook a5, rook b2, rook g5, rook b4. White just comes back here and finally goes 8-6, taking the final pawn and winning the game. Here Maria resigned, and with this, India has won the game 3-1 after the first scare in the first board. So India is currently on 7th place on the women's ranking. Uh, they have won all the 3 games, but because today they didn't win with 4-0, so they are on 7th place. Hopefully this won't matter much with so many rounds to go. Tomorrow India is playing France, which is a very strong team with 3 international masters, one woman grandmaster, and one woman international master. Hopefully, we'll be again putting this kind of great show and winning the game. So if you guys like this kind of content and want to see more of this, please like and subscribe. I'll be posting more recaps of round 4 tomorrow. See you then. Bye bye.